So who here has built a questionable notification in the interest of re-engagement? I think these are I think three kind of prototypical examples of some of my favorite notifications I've ever received. So the thing is, these notifications do work. They do cause re-engagement. They remind the users that the products work. But they can be, they can be tacky. And they're not that much fun to build, and there's got to be a little bit of a better way. So I'm going to talk about some other things you can do when you're looking at re-engagement. And so what problem were these apps trying to solve that caused them to send those notifications? So every app obviously has a funnel. Like, users have to install the app, then they have to do something to activate. And then down at the bottom of this funnel, which is like the metric we're going to care about today, they become engaged users. And what an engaged user is someone who comes back to the app regularly. So a user might use an app every single day, and that's a user that's highly engaged. They might use it every single week, or they might use it once a month. And all of these users are engaged users. They're maybe getting different value from the app. If someone's using it every day, obviously that's a critical part of their life. Once a month, maybe it helps them book trips on the, to Europe or something. What these apps are trying to solve is what happens when someone gets into this once a month problem, and then something happens. Life happens. They go on vacation and they just forget this app exists, or they become busy and they just stop using the app. Or it's just not solving a problem for them for a while. Maybe there's 6 months where they just don't need the service that they needed before. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to kind of think about this re-engagement problem through slices. And then after that, we're going to talk a bit about other ways to reduce friction to help rise that engagement number. So slices are a new Jetpack library that came out for Android after I/O. And because they're Jetpack, that means they're backwards compatible to 95% of devices, which is interesting for us as developers and designers, because that means we can use them in production and users will actually see them, which is awesome. So what is a slice? I think this video that was in the I/O keynote is a great example of what a slice is. So it's a small view into an application that is interactive. So the user can click on elements in the slice. And when you click on those elements, so we have those 3 buttons at the top, we have the heart button, and then all of the rows can also be clicked. It causes things to happen in the application. When you click on the top, obviously it controls the playlist. If you click on the heart, it's going to trigger a heart. All of these can either trigger something in the background, like this slice does, or they can go into the application. You have a choice as a developer what you do in response to these events. And then where they're really interesting is they're going to show up in more places. Right? So this is something that I build a slice, and I put it out there. And then this can show up in the Google Search app. And this is like really, really exciting for re-engagement. Why is that? So what makes a good re-engagement campaign? A good re-engagement campaign is relevant. So when I get a re-engagement notification, I want it to be something I might actually care about. Just speaking personally, like things I respond to are re-engagements where I'm like, oh yeah, I totally wanted to see that. That's awesome. It's timely. It's coming in at a time where I'm interested in interacting with the content that's presented to me. And it's actionable. So this is like the key part. It has to have all 3. It has to be relevant to me. It has to be timely to me, which is sometimes hard to guess. And it has to have something I can do. It has to have an action I can take in response to getting this. Otherwise, all I'm getting is information. And so if I look back at this slice example right here, I've searched for music. And I don't know what music player app this is, but it's presented a solution to my problem. I now have music. All I have to do is hit that play button, and music is showing up. And so as a re-engagement campaign, this is fantastic. It's actionable, it's timely, and it's relevant to what my needs are right now. And so taking a look at some examples that we've seen slices as a useful product so far, kind of giving you an idea of what you might be able to use for your own applications. For utility-style applications, quick access is one pattern for slices. So this is an example from idea from Maps, where when you search for home, it's going to show you some of your frequent Maps locations. And if you clicked on one of those, it would open the Maps app and start routing you to that destination. Inline tasks, so we already looked at this example, but if I hit pause and maybe music was playing, two things that I could know about, Google search might choose to display this slice right here, in which case, like, this is directly solving my problem. And then discovery. If you have content that's discoverable, YouTube is a classic example of this. There's like a large category of content out there, and when I search for videos, it's capable of recommending a video that it thinks I might like. Or similarly, recall. And this is another really, really powerful re-engagement campaign as well. So what this is I have some content that the user has previously engaged with and has found value in, and I know that this user cares about this content, so I'm going to go ahead and surface this to this user again, and then they're going to be reminded of that value they had in the past. So let's take a look at some guidelines for how to design a slice. So this one's my favorite of any design I've ever seen. So on the do side, I think it's fairly clean, it's fairly obvious. There's one call to action, it's to watch that video. There's some stuff up on the top that's maybe distracting, but it's not getting in the way. Like, all of those are relevant to interacting with this one video. This one on the right, or I guess you're right, yes. The one on the right is the slide I like to call, this is the slice I like to call the slice with two marketing departments. So we can see, obviously, we have the same slice up here. Things are going well in most of this area. And then the second marketing department from the other side of the company added my channels, just literally like tacked it on there at the end, and then just tacked it on down at the bottom. So that's not super relevant to me. So this is violating that relevant part of what makes a good re-engagement campaign. I'm definitely not going to care about all of those things at the same time. I might care about one of those videos, but all of those channels at the bottom is definitely, like, can't be relevant to me at the same time as that video. On the do slice here, we see the same design we saw earlier. It's clean, it's simple, it has kind of minimal controls. And then over on the don't slice here, it's basically the same thing, but the difference is there's too many options. I mean, this is just like a pretty simple design consideration. But with all of those options, I can't really focus as a user on what I would like to be doing. And the goal here really was to get me back to the music, and so focused on that. And then these are some funny do's and don't slices as well. So when I have the short version of a slice, it's important to show controls that help me actually get some tasks done, right? It has to be actionable. So here, obviously, I can't actually interact with my music. I can't play it. Maybe it takes me to the app, but it's better if I can just hit the play button there. And then this, I don't know, let's say it's a Nest control down here. So we have a temperature of 65 degrees. And in the don't category, you can only raise the temperature. So that would be a pretty mediocre UI. So you would like to make sure the user can actually accomplish a task that's relevant to the slice that you're displaying. All right, so let's take a look, just slice design 101, like what comprises a slice, like what goes into these things, and how you can build them and build some of the slices we've talked about already. So all slices are comprised of a list. So a list has some arguments. They're not super important, but it does say that I'm going to make a list of elements, and they're always laid out in these rows, something like this. And then inside that list, I can put a couple different kinds of things. So the first one that I might put first is a header row, which of course has a title and a subtitle. And then a header row can also have, a primary action. So the primary action is what happens when the user hits somewhere on the header row. It's also, if you don't specify any other actions elsewhere, it's anywhere on the slice. So when you hit that, like that, when you hit that, it does something. It can either open your application, it could trigger something that happens in the background as well. Like, you have full control over what it is. And the way it does that is by using a pending intent. So anything that you can launch with an intent or do with an intent, you can do as a primary action. There we go. So then the other thing that a header row can have are actions. So these are icons or images or possibly timestamps that go over on the end of the row. So here we've added a star and a diamond. So this is the entire design surface. Like, this is the design language for a header row. There's no other options. You can put these things in these places. The next type of row we have is just a row. It's called a row, and it has a header and a title as well. It also has what's called a title item. So this is something that goes at the beginning of the row. So it can be a timestamp like I've done here, or it could be an icon or an image. So if it's an icon, it can also be clickable and be like a button that shows up on the user right there. And then over on the right, I can add the similar type of actions as I did in the header row. And so this is, again, the entire design surface for a row. Now, these two things already are enough to build some really, really, really cool slices. And for most slices, this is probably all you're going to actually need to use in order to build. You've noticed like it's really constrained. You actually, as a design surface, you don't have that many options. But in doing so, you kind of can rely upon like minimalism in order to create a really impressive UI. And there's one more type thing to mention. You can also use a toggle button. This is really important, like those hearts we showed before. So those need to be updating immediately when the user clicks on them. So those shouldn't just be buttons that update. Those should be toggles because they want to immediately change as soon as the user clicks on them. So let's go ahead and build a slice. So we'll start with a header row. It's just going to have a title and a subtitle. And then we're going to add 3 actions on the right. And these are just icons that we're going to pass over to the slice, and it's going to display over on the right. Then we're going to add 3 rows. Each of these has an image on them, a title and a subtitle. That was impressive. Title and a subtitle. And then we're just going to add some actions over on the right. And this is obviously the slice that we showed at the beginning. So that's literally all there is to a slice. It's just headers and rows, and that's most slices right there. And so one interesting thing here is in this example I just showed, it's scrollable. So slices on some display surfaces are scrollable. And this is important when you're designing them. That's some display surfaces. That they may not be scrollable, and you have to consider that. If they're not scrollable, they have the option to have a see more link that you show. When you do that, maybe you'll open them into the application. Another really important thing when you're designing these is to consider that they may not display the entire thing. They may decide to display only the first row. The Google Search app may decide to do this if it has low confidence the user wants to see the thing that it's chosen to display. And other applications may have other reasons to choose to show the shortened version. So when that happens, you'll want to make sure that you have all the controls and that. So this is the same slice as before. It's just only showing the first row. The slice that I generated actually had all of the rows on it. That's pretty much all there is to slices. Oh, no, there's actually a whole nother lecture. Slices 102. So there's a bunch of slices. You've probably seen images of these that don't fit to the category that we've already talked about so far. So we have headers and rows. And these have kind of some visual differentiation with the height of that image in the middle. And the one on the bottom, of course, has the 5 images. So in order to build a slice like this, we need the third type of row that exists in slices. So it's a grid row. So as you might expect, it is a grid layout. So you add a grid row, and then you can add images to it. Here I've added a large image. And this is how you get that hero image that you see in a lot of slices that have hero images to display. So this is going to be larger than a header row and a regular row. So it's going to be able to get you that vertical differentiation. If you add more than one image, it's just going to go ahead and lay them out in a grid like that. 3, 4. And currently, that's the largest number of large images that you can add to a slice. If I want to add a 5th image, I have to turn them into small images. And small images are smaller than large images. So I'm not going to talk about specific DPs. It's currently an alpha product. It's probably going to change. And this is recorded, so 2 years from now, when someone watches this on YouTube, it's definitely going to be different by then. But these are smaller. The other thing you can add to a grid row is text. So you can add a title, and you can add a subtitle, and text as well. So you can use this to display text next to each other, like this. So for example, you might think about like a flight would have a start and an end time. That would be a good example of where you'd want to use these. And you can go wild. This is actually the one place in slices where you're not really constrained to good design. You're allowed to just build anything you want. So grids can mix and match the things that go into them. So here, for example, we have a large image with text, so you can combine both of those in the same thing, and that's going to lay out like this first column here, just a regular large image, then a cell with just text in it, and then a small image. So you can combine all of these together. I would not recommend that particular design, but you might come up with situations where that makes sense. So let's put this all together and design some of the slices that we saw earlier. So we have this design right here. So this is a pretty typical hero, right? It has 3 actions on the top. The whole thing is clickable, and there's a giant image to draw the user's focus. This is a cookie cutter slice design right here. So we're going to obviously do this with a header on the top and a row on the bottom. So these are the elements that we've already talked about and already seen. And then in the middle, that's just going to be a large image in a grid. And that's exactly how we would implement that in the slices language. The next thing we want to do is take a look at this other one that has 5 images. So this is another typical thing when you have a collection of things, you want to kind of give this impression to the user that, hey, there's a collection here, you want to click more. And really interesting, there's this plus 115 thing going on at the end to say like, hey, no, check out, there's more going on over here. So let's take a look at that. So this is a little bit more complicated than the previous. So this is a header row with 1 action. So this is what we've talked about already before. And then 5 small images. But interestingly, there's still this plus 115, which there's not anything in the slices API that lets you put text on top of an image. So the way you would have to do that is you'd have to raster that on the image yourself, either maybe on the back end or in your app itself, and then give an image with the rastered text on it to the slice. And then the last one, and this is pretty typical for like, a flight app, or this looks, like a booking app. So you have an upcoming trip to Seattle, which is a header row with 2 actions. Then we have that hero again. And then out of the bottom, we have the check-in and check-out. And so this is going to be a grid with 2 texts on the bottom. And that's pretty much all there is to the slice design language. Like there's not that many options, so it's like not that hard to use. And they constrain you in ways that are helpful. So let's talk a little bit about aspect ratio. This is a design talk, so I want to talk about the aspect ratio of images to use. So I've used an image which is over there on the right, and then I've laid it out into 1 cell. And this is all in the alpha that's in there right now. None of this will probably be accurate in 4 months. I expect these DPs to all change. We'll talk about that. So this is going to go ahead and lay out with an aspect ratio like this, and it's just going to crop the stuff on the top and the bottom. If I were designing this, I would also consider the pixels adjacent to the edge of this to be dangerous as well. I would not expect that the like maybe 10% on the top and the bottom is where I should put my main call to action. I'd try to put that towards the middle. If I have 2 cells, it's going to crop just a little bit less. Again, I would not use the top and the bottom because I would expect that to change over time, both in this design surface, which is similar to the Google search design surface, as well as this might show up in other places. It might show up in other apps. You can imagine perhaps it could end up in Assistant someday, and that's going to look very different as well. 4 cells, this is going to crop the right and left side. And then similar note, I would also not use the pixels towards the edge of the area. There's a couple other considerations when you're designing slices. We have the icons are tinted, and you don't really get any control as a designer. It's maybe unfortunate that that's the way it is, but if you're designing a slice, you don't have any control. The surface that's displaying the slice decides what color those icons will be. Luckily, the Google Search app, which is the target that I think a lot of people are looking at right now, chooses a nice neutral gray. But it could be something bright and bold, so you want to keep that in consideration. The other considerations, we already mentioned this, scrolling is optional. And if the scrolling is disabled, you have the ability to put a see more link or a see more row in the bottom. Multi-row is optional, and then you need to make sure that you consider the tint when you design your slice. So that covers the basics of slices and the advanced of slices. That's slices. So we have a list, we have headers and rows, and then we have grids for images. And that's all you have for the design surface for slices. So now I want to shift over to talking about how to reduce friction in order to help with engagement as well. So I'm going to do this by focusing on login and transfer. Why login and transfer? Like, why is that related to engagement? And that's because in America, a lot of users get a new phone every 2 years. And when that happens, that means half of your user base every year gets a new phone. And when that happens, they have to re-log in. So when we look back at this engagement diagram we had before, that breakage might be they got a new phone, and on the new phone, they're not logged in. So what happens when they get a new phone? Well, they'll log in to Google Play, and the Google Play will reinstall your app. So you don't have to do anything there. And that's cool. But then the first time they launch it, if you present them an email address and a password, there's an opportunity. There's a substantial amount of friction right there. There's an opportunity that they're never going to log in, and you're never going to see that user again. And so what you want to do instead is say, welcome back. So there's a couple ways that you can make a better design here than giving them a login and a password. The first one is Google Sign-In. So I think everyone knows about Google Sign-In. It's, as we like to call it, it's the red button. The blue button also works, but the red button is the Google Sign-In button. So it's a one-click option that you can add to your applications. And when a user has previously logged into your application with Google Sign-In, you can even use an API to skip this on reinstall and just go ahead and log them in right away. So Google Sign-In works across devices. There's iOS, Android, and then it works on Chrome as well. Well, it works on web as well, more than just Chrome. The next thing I want to talk about is Smart Lock for passwords. So Smart Lock for passwords it's effectively a password manager, and it's backwards compatible to speaker notes. It's backwards compatible to API 14, which is like forever ago. That's some of our new libraries aren't even that backwards compatible. So it's backwards compatible to basically 100% of devices. And when a user logs in, it'll offer to save their password, and then when they come back, they'll get prompted if they want to just go ahead and log in. So they don't have to remember their password, which is another obvious place where a user is going to get drop off when they buy a new phone. So Netflix added Smart Lock, and they found that they got 20% fewer support requests for password-related inquiries. So this is helping people log in. It's also helping people re-engage when they get a new phone. And then with O, we introduced an API for autofill. So autofill for passwords works exactly the same as Smart Lock. It's a password manager. It's going to save passwords somewhere. In fact, it's actually going to save passwords to the exact same place as Smart Lock. And they share. So if the users previously saved their password with Smart Lock, they're going to go ahead and be able to restore that when they come back with autofill on their O device. What? Out of here. All right. So, and then there's an important note that you should have if you do set up, or when you do set up autofill. So autofill for Android has the ability to share with autofill for Chrome, which is awesome if you have your passwords saved via autofill. So you log in via Chrome, install the Android app, you're already logged in. This is amazing. This is a great user experience. But we can't just give your user's password to some random Android app. That would probably not be what anyone wanted. So what you have to do is go ahead and tell us what your Android app is. So you already do this for deep links with the assetlinks.json. So you just have to extend that to say that you're OK with us sharing the login information from the Chrome browser to the Android app. And then when you do that, the two autofill services will share with each other, and the passwords will be able to use on Android and on Chrome. To enable or to make autofill work, so autofill will do its best to try to figure out what your views are and figure out which one's the password one and which one's the email address one. It might get that wrong, in which case your user is going to be super confused. So what you can do is set autofill hints, and we do recommend this for all of your important views. These tell the autofill system exactly what the view is. And then the last thing I want to talk about is auto backup. So we're still in this new phone situation. So Gmail has this welcome screen, and a lot of apps do have a welcome splash screen like this, where they kind of welcome the user, they onboard a user maybe through a carousel or something like that the first time they launch the application. And this is only supposed to show up once. You're not supposed to see this a second or a third time. And as a user, it's kind of annoying when you get these like 5 or 6 times. You don't want to see these a second time. So you want to skip this, and you skip this by saving it maybe to a shared preference on the old phone. And then they bought a new phone, and the Gmail app launches, and you need to skip it again, but the shared preference is on the old phone. So we have this thing called auto backup, which is literally for exactly this. So we have a shared preference on the old phone, and we'd like to transfer it over to the new phone before the app launches the first time. And the way this works is about once a night or so, it's going to go ahead and take and make effectively just a zip file of all of the files that you've written down to disk on the Android app. And it's going to go ahead and store those to auto backup. So there's just it's an auto backup cloud. And then when the user gets a new phone, before the app launches the first time, it's going to attempt to download that zip file. If it doesn't succeed, which could happen, maybe they don't have enough network or something like that, it'll just skip it. But it's pretty reliable. And then when they launch the app the first time, all of those files from the old device are available on the new device, which is fantastic for the shared preference situation we talked about just a second ago. So to set up auto backup, all you have to do is go to your manifest, and there's some XML tags you can add that aren't super exciting, but you can include and you can exclude files. And so this is like the key point to get across. The other thing to note about auto backup is it's not a good place to store sensitive information. So don't put credit card numbers or anything that you don't think that should be widely available in there. All right? Does anyone have any questions about slices or any of the features I talked about for sign-in on?
You talked about some of the targets like Google search, but then also potentially Assistant or other targets for slices at some point in the future. Are there ways that apps that are defining slices can recommend specific targets and not others, or kind of like declare an intent for the types of actions the customer might be interested in taking at a certain point in time?
Yeah, so what I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about the Google search case, because I think that's probably the most interesting right now. So for Google search, what you can do is you can provide per install, like on the phone, you tell the Google search app a list of keywords that might be relevant. And so these can be personalized to the user, and they can also just be personalized, to the install. So you could, for example, if you knew all of the user's contacts, you might be able to share like some names that you think that they're very likely to be searching for, where they would want to go into your application. That might be a situation where it would make sense to do so.
Like it was names of users and you had favorites and contacts, and there's a connection.
Yeah, exactly, something like that. You can also set it up so that, obviously you can embed a slice into another application. And that's something that, it's still a little bit like we're working on it. But yeah, I think it's good feedback. I'll definitely make sure to share that.
At the end of the slices section, you had like a quick summary, being like these are things you can customize on header action items. And there's one, I can't remember, it started with a T. It was like color or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but show me an example of that. It's like, yeah, tinted icons.
Oh yeah, so you don't get to control the tint of the icons as when you're designing a slice.
Like the action items that you're talking about, like
Yeah, like what do you have to?
I don't think you can control.
Yeah, you have no control over this, and you have to consider this when you're designing.
Right. If your slice shows up in Spotify, just making this up, then the Spotify theme or branding is what's going to kind of overlay. So I assume you don't get this like tapestry experience of all
Exactly.
slices creating this like gradient thing.
Exactly. And I think the biggest thing to consider there is, if you're putting like images with really bold colors, and then there's another bold color, like that could potentially clash.
Yeah, it's definitely better to use icons than let them keep rather than trying to get too flash. So one question about slices. Do slices guarantee a contract that at least 5 images across? How a certain number of small images and a certain number of large images across in a
So I can talk about, the slices implementation that's currently shipped in the support library does have that behavior.
Okay.
As for guaranteed contract for all future use, I don't believe that I don't think that that's a thing that exists.
Mostly for the use case of the 100, of the plus 115. Is there actually a safe way to implement that? Or?
So the best way to do something like that would be to just, you have a surface that you're targeting. So for example, you might target the Google search app. So go play with that and just check to see what it's actually displaying. Yeah. All right. Thank you all for coming.